So welcome everyone to this webinar, Character Design on Halloween Villains, hosted by myself, Paul Bussey, and this webinar is copyright 2022 Digital Art Live. And in this community workshop today, we're hoping to look at Halloween and villain style characters and looking in particular at those stereotypical visual elements that we would look for to identify a villain easily. And I think we'll see some great artwork today. I've got a series of artwork today to show that demonstrates many of these elements. I've tried to find in generative art, I used a search engine to find some great sort of concept ideas and designs of villains or characters that had these kind of traits about them. And I thought it would be useful to study these traits and to, figure out what, why do these traits tell us that these characters are villains in the first place, I think that's interesting thinking about the design of a villain. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Tassos, who's a professional comic book artist. He's got some visuals to share with us today.
Okay, so I'm going to go over some visuals I've created over the past few years. So okay, so this is a character I created. I'm mostly using Poser and Dust. So basically I'm taking the models as they are, and then I'm like sketching and drawing on top of them. So this is a female character I created, which I've added an interesting texture, I think, on the skin. So her skin came off to reveal something behind it. So when I'm designing these characters, most of the times, not always, but most of the times I think of a story behind them, and I'm not always in the notion of good and bad. I always find characters to be more interesting when they have a mixture of these characteristics. So here's another one which also deals with some stereotypes, the evil, let's say, lycanthropy-like character, and then you have the sexy female, but she's not a damsel in distress. She is holding a ray gun, so she is in a way exposing her beautiful body, but she has also the control. So she has the tools, let's say, to fight the evil character. This is another visual I've created with shattered glass effect, trying to convey the pain of the soul of an android. Similar idea of a character I've created. I like the idea of the different levels of the puzzle that is composing this face, and it's sort of like, there's a lot of shattering happening on the skin, but I do believe also on the soul itself. Of course, one of my favorite characters, Pinhead, and this is a model I acquired some time ago, and I wanted to turn him into a priest this time, not of any particular religion, but those of you who know Hellraiser, the idea of the Cenobites existed with Catholic monks who used to punish themselves, like the skin, because they wanted to shed away the sins of the skin. And I found it interesting how Clive Parker incorporated that into his movie. So yeah, Pinhead is one of my favorite characters, because he, even in the movie, he says that there are angels to some, demons to others, and I find it interesting how he was a human and he turned into a demon or another entity that explores different types of pleasure. And this is a fight scene between a dwarf and again, a more stereotypical type of a villain, let's say. Or is she the villain? Well, so when I'm designing this illustration, sometimes I think that we have this stereotype of what a demon should look like, a monster should look like, and what a good guy should look like. But sometimes it's interesting to challenge these stereotypes. So the classical monster, Frankenstein, getting his bride, his wife, going away from the barn who burns, so you can see the reflection of the fire on their skin. And of course, I designed it to look like a magazine cover. Here's another sort of like a portrait of a love couple, and they're sort of like posing in front of the camera, a lot of sadness in the eyes, and I somehow intentionally elongated the spike, it's sort of like entering her skull, but it also becomes a unification between these two characters. So there's a lot of pain, but I also find a lot of romance in them. And the other thing that I also find interesting is that I definitely would not enjoy the pleasure of having spikes on my skin. I find it interesting how these characters accept them, and it becomes part of who they are and part of their psyche. And it also shows how we humans perceive storytelling. I mean, it's one thing to make a story about vampires and monsters, and it's another thing to be a monster. It's another thing to encounter them. So here's another image I created, which also won a second award from 3DSK competition a few years ago. So again, I'm using this German military female soldier, who, of course, we all know the Nazis, they were like, torturing people and stuff like that. So the question here is, who is the villain? I mean, is this a vampire, or is this a product of a mutation that happened in a laboratory, and then vengeance comes to haunt the person who was responsible for that? And then another visual, this one I named it Madness. So it was sort of like, I did the portrait in itself, and then I experimented with the different, the prismatic effect of using different parts of the face to create a new composition, which actually speaks to me more about madness rather than just having this face alone. And over here we have this stereotypical villain, but then the question I pose to myself is, who is the real villain over here? Is it this creature who just follows his thirst for blood, or is this person over here who in my mind is conducting this type of experiment? And then, of course, an alien creature, which, is he evil? Is he a good character? I don't know. Could be both. definitely the eyes are sinister. And then, of course, both of them are sort of like mutants, hybrids, but apparently the bigger one with the octopus tentacles appears to be more, well, stronger and more of the villain side of things. And then, of course, the Baroness, who is apparently very beautiful, very attractive, but is she a good guy? Is she a bad guy? You know, it's like sometimes I find people who are evil and beautiful to be more terrifying than monsters. It's like when you see horror movies and you see the monster, it's like, and the monster reveals itself, then you feel at ease because you know what it is you're looking at. But before the revelation, I always find that, you know, successful and beautiful horror story lies more in the mystery rather than in the revelation. And then this is basically the face I showed before that it was shattered. And again, inspired from the Cenobites, but not too much scars. And then the stereotypical, more like macho military villain, I guess. So yeah, these are the things I wanted to share. I don't know if there are any questions or comments.
So Michelle asks, is checking if the Baroness character is from the G.I. Joe cartoon or your own Baroness in your own
No,
story?
it's my own version of it, but I can understand why there is the association of that character. Yeah, no, it's not the Baroness that we know. It's like when I was designing this, I was thinking more in terms of vampire and something more elegant. Yeah, but I also like the Baroness from the G.I. Joe. I love the G.I. Joe series. So perhaps intuitively a subject, you know, I get inspired like from many sources. And
one of the aspects in my villains visual elements list is an asymmetric face. And I actually in one of the search engines I use, I couldn't immediately find that many asymmetric baddie villains. But I'm really pleased to see that you've thought about that for some of your characters. You know, like you've got this kind of cracked puzzle face a little bit earlier on. I found that fascinating because that asymmetry immediately.
this one.
Yeah, well, you had a couple. So you had that shattered glass, and I think you had one just after. What's the one just after that? Yeah, here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that asymmetry immediately, you almost you feel super off balance yourself when you see this character, and you wonder what's caused that asymmetry, and you wonder, I suppose, what kind of pain that is causing the character and why they became disfigured
Cool.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I always find it fascinating the imperfections of the things that we draw, the things that we write, the things that we create. And I find it sad when people they want to change, you know, how they look, and they want to add prosthetics and stuff like that because they feel insecure and they think that they're going to become more beautiful. Whereas, like, I find the uniqueness of each person to be more beautiful. And I think pain is also part of the happiness, and happiness is part of the pain. And I think this is the whole experience of like, and this is why I'm a big advocate of like of peace and not, you know, having wars and killing people, because life is too short. And it's so diverse and so beautiful, and it should be explored in its, you know, it's in all dimensions.
Yeah, and having stories from the point of view of the so-called antagonist, you know, to actually show that, there's some shades of grey involved.
Yeah.
They've got some good in them as well. I think that's a fascinating thing to do. Like, this character here, you've got the asymmetry again in the face, but you can see she's beautiful, but she's had this history. Something's happened in the past that's caused this to happen, and you wonder, what that story's about and how she's overcoming
Yeah.
that and so on.
Yeah, right now I'm in the juncture of, like, in my work I have done a lot of sci-fi, and I've touched a lot of politics in my work and in my novels. And right now I'm trying to also explore other philosophies, and one of them is like what it is that makes us human, and what are the stereotypes that sometimes inhibit us from exploring our full potential. And nobody really starts to be a racist, or nobody really starts to hate people like when they are born. I mean, this is sort of like, it's part of the culture, part of the experiences, part of the things that people have. And I always find it interesting when I'm designing my villains, so to speak. I always try to think of them. I mean, how were they when they were babies? How they grew up? What happened to them? Why did they become who they became? And it's always interesting, because then you go and you build that in the characters, and you try to also become that villain and try to understand why is that person behaving the way it's behaving. And then you also get other questions. Okay, so that villain became villain because of some hardship. Shall I allow him to live, or shall I permit him to do the atrocities he's doing because, or she's doing because they had a traumatic experience? So it's very interesting, I think.
Yeah, I remember the phrase of hurt people hurt people. As somebody who hurts somebody else has themselves been hurt in the past. It's almost guaranteed, and when you start to think about that, then you realize that it's not this one-dimensional person. They've got this history, they've got a challenge that they've had in the past that's transformed them somewhat. So thank you for sharing your artwork today.
Thank you for letting me share. Thank you.
It's been fantastic. Thank you. Right, now I'm going to switch over to my screen, my desktop, and I'm going to pull up my list again of these stereotypical elements of villains, things like sharp features, unhealthy looks, which could be pale or unhealthy colored complexion. It could be scars or tattoos. It could be an asymmetrical face, as we've mentioned. It could be a face that's concealed or partially concealed. One of Tassos' examples was having a complete mask over the face, like a gas mask. Exaggerated features is another one. And if the character is tall, giant, then that sends a message to us that they could be threatening. And again, we get this stereotypical reaction to that. A giant is somebody who is threatening, is a physical threat to us. So we're going to react to that that situation. So let's look at some examples that I used. So what I did, I used a search engine on generated art called Lexica, and this allowed me to find out very quickly some really good examples of, for example, sharp featured faces. And this was the text prompt that was used to generate this particular art. The same prompt was used to create different versions of it. And yes, I do get the feeling that a sharp featured face produces this, these angular features provide perhaps a threat or a sense of a villain. But even more so when the eyes are also angular, perhaps a little bit narrowed as well. And this, I think these images are quite representative of that, particularly I'm trying to figure out which is the most threatening to me. Perhaps let me know in the chat, 1, 2, or 3. Number 2, I think, is slightly more innocent. Number 1, his stare is definitely intense, and the way his lips are kind of pursed, there's a bit more of a threat there. Number 3 has got more of an expression of mixture of tiredness and something else going on there. So anyway, I thought, and it was interesting how this particular image generated in the middle, it sort of accentuated this angular face by also adding, the haircut in such a way that it just made the face even more angular, more triangular. So yeah, part of the keyword there was pointed face, and I think this sort of helped to get that result. And then pale-skinned characters. Now, I'll go back. I'll talk about this now, actually. So, earlier this week, I found this article, which I'll pop in the chat, which I found fascinating. So there it is. You can take a look at it yourselves at a later point. But they did a study on typical characters in video games, villains and heroes, and what are the elements that visually sort of cue us to say, hey, this is a villain and this is a hero. And they actually did sampling and kind of broke it down to figure out, what made an audience react to a villain and to a hero. So they kind of came up with this, that villains tend to be larger in size, look older than the heroes. And the heroes tend to have a rounder face and eye shapes, in contrast to villains' narrow eyes and faces. So let me know in the chat if you would kind of agree with that assessment. And this study was done by a couple of students from a Swedish university, and I think it was a really interesting set of results. So, they started talking about how, particularly when it came to things like skin and how skin looked, if that was pale and white and just didn't look very well kept skin, that would kind of repel us, and we would automatically associate that kind of character as a threat, because inbuilt to us is is this survival, that we don't want to get infected by some disease from somebody else. So if a character has pale skin, then that might suggest to us that they're unwell, that they're not doing so good, and they you end up with this kind of unconscious assessment that there's a little bit of something going on there that could be a threat. So I think one of these characters, the right-hand one, I think the prompt text was Scottish beautiful, pale-skinned woman. And indeed she is, but the pale skin to me, you might slide the classification of that character over towards, particularly if she lived in the Middle Ages, people would see that as a perhaps, would they classify her as a witch because of her pale skin? And I think often, that kind of thing would happen, wouldn't it? And particularly with the white hair, that's sort of overemphasizing that point. Oh, this character is a witch. That stereotypical look and having that white hair as well, which is kind of unusual, isn't it? So pale skin characters can give us that impression of unwellness. Then we've got older characters where if you've got a character with plenty of wrinkles, pale skin, then again you've got that sense of unwellness, disease. That creates a bit of a threat to us. And in that study that I showed, it mentioned that the villain would often be shown as an older character, tend to be an older character rather than younger. Somebody younger who's more beautiful, more aesthetically pleasing, as opposed to an older character who's a bit more rough around the edges and it's going to provide a few negative points in our assessment of them. So that that tends to be working in stereotypes. And you can see some of the prompt text here. I particularly was very interested in the prompt text, and you could try this yourself, of swirly, vibrant color lines. And whoever did this, let's go back again, came up with some really interesting characters as a result, I think, particularly with that phrase there, swirly, vibrant color lines. So that same or similar text came up with this character, which is just marvelous creases in the skin. I love the effect that we ended up here with. Just amazing. So you definitely get the feeling that these characters are aged, that they've been through a lot, in this case, extreme environments perhaps, or it might be just in their, maybe it's in their DNA. Yeah, B says these images give off the vibes of dead people, which is certainly, a trigger, isn't it? I'm going to avoid this character. Again, the swirly, vibrant color lines prompt text, I think, is really helping provide that amazingly textured skin here. And how about this one? So I think the key words here is gaunt, elderly face, wrinkled face, fine details, but they've also added in to the mix tentacles, chulu, and a few other horror sort of text phrases or words relating to different horror stories. So, this is an amazing result for a concept, I think. Really interesting. I really recommend Lexica is a search engine to give you inspiration for characters, character design. This one, one of the elements I was looking at for villains was angular eyes, and I did a search in Lexica for angular-eyed characters, and this was kind of almost like a literal hit or result. You can see here the way it looks like a, like a charcoal drawing, and how the eyes have literally been angled, and so you end up with this quite sharp looking, slightly angry face. You've got angry eyes there, definitely. So we've got some interesting things in the chat. So Michelle is mentioning that in Western cultures, a person who's healthy and wealthy is slim, athletic, and tanned. But that used to mean you were a peasant. That's right. So things have flipped. I looked for characters that had scarred skin. So I just put in that search term and came up with these two interesting characters where the input text for the generator was serial killer. Nothing complicated about the prompt text, but certainly when the character is covered with blood and scars in this manner, then they look quite unhealthy, quite unbalanced, and there's no doubt in my mind that these are villains. But the left-hand character, you could dive a bit deeper, I think, and you could say, well, whatever's happened to her perhaps hasn't happened to her recently, and perhaps she's had a normal, good life up until a recent point. And then some tragedy has occurred or happened, So I like this sense of a character that has this normality, but then you've got these very visual, obvious elements that is suggesting some trauma has happened. So that's very interesting. Then I looked at the element of tattoos, and I think there is a stereotypical reaction to tattoos. So, we would perhaps not associate a person who wears tattoos like this to, I don't know, for example, spend all their time in church. They're more likely to be perhaps a biker, to be a street person, perhaps, to belong to a particular gang or culture that's a bit rougher than normal. And, we make those stereotypical judgments. But of course, there's other cultures where tattoos are part of the culture. They represent history. They represent very spiritual values to those people. So, it's there's a wide range of reasons why tattoos exist and why people use them. It's not just this one funnel that we're used to all of the time. But in these examples here, you've got quite square, heavy-set characters, determined set jaw lines, and you don't want to mess with these people. They look like quite tough characters, so they fit very much into that stereotypical rough guy mode. Yeah, B says in the chat, facial tattoos always remind me of war painting. Yeah. Yes, that's a good point, that association. So here's turning things on their head, and this was a wonderful generated image where the prompt text was to do with an indigenous man with ink tattoos looking at the camera, and so you can tell straight away that his tattoos and his life, his visage is suggesting that this is all part of his culture and is ingrained into him. It's just super important, and it's just who he is. And to me, there's not a threat from this character. He's not a villain. He's just somebody who had an incredible amount of wisdom and experience. I tried some experiments myself in Midjourney earlier this week by using keyword prompts of Venetian masks, and I came up with some very interesting results where the Venetian mask would actually become part of the skin of the character. So I tried applying it to witches, and these characters are actually very beautiful, but of course they've got the pale skin, and so you do have some flags here saying, well, these characters may be a little bit unsavory, but the detailing, the resulting detailing was amazing. I was really pleased with the result of these generations that came out. So I love how a skin on a character can tell so much of a story. I probably went maybe a little bit too detailed in a sense. So I was asking for a Venetian mask for a black cat motif because I thought, well, maybe some witches might want that on their mask, and maybe there's elements in there that reflect that. So yeah, I was pleased with these results. Another element of villains is overemphasizing features, and I liked this text prompt because it included the phrase uncanny valley, and I think that would be an interesting experiment to pull out some concept art just with that phrase, actually, to see what kind of faces you'd end up with using uncanny valley. And I think there's certain characters, certain personalities out there that are very easy to kind of pick on, that almost have uncanny valley faces to start with. Now, I don't know this personality, but I did see him being picked on a few times in the stream, the result searches, search results I was looking at, and you can see here that some features are overemphasized. The mouth looks perhaps a little bit broader and more frog-like than it should. And the eyes certainly have been narrowed, and you've got these incredible creases, almost Joker-like, isn't he? This character, where it's almost like a mask rather than a real face. It's just incredible. So exaggerated features do work, and you can easily identify this character as a villain, I think, as a result. The ultimate unhealthy example, as I think B mentioned earlier, was if you have somebody that is dead or undead, then that's definitely an unhealthy character you don't want to touch or be near. And so I think this is taking the villain to the max in terms of that element, isn't it? Having a zombie. So this, I had to include one of these, and this is a zombie None. And so you've got definitely some asymmetry going on with the face as well. Very unhealthy looking teeth. And certainly the skin is not doing good. Then I started looking up a few characters with covered faces, or partially covered faces. I started looking for hooded characters, and certainly the character in the middle, to me, is the most threatening, because all you can see are his eyes, and to me, his eyes are, it's signifying danger. I'm just getting a signal of danger from the character in the middle. The left-hand character looks super angry, and the character on the right maybe the least threatening, but certainly got this intense stare going on, potential of anger there in the expression. So it's very interesting, isn't it? Once you start to cover up a character's face, what kind of reaction you get, and what kind of stereotypes are portrayed when you start to do this. And then my last slide, to just turn everything on its head, I thought why not show a hero? Show the opposite kind of character. And somebody had come up with the character Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, using Robin Williams as an actor, and I thought that was a wonderful idea. And look at the result; it's just fantastic. So you get this meld of I think the Aragorn character that we're used to seeing in the movies, the actor who plays him, is kind of melded with Robin Williams. And with Robin Williams' face, a comic, you've got the opposite to a villain, haven't you? Somebody who's approachable, funny, sensitive, playful, and you've got a very different kind of face going on there. And you mix that in with Aragorn, somebody who's trustworthy, steadfast, who is been out in the wilderness for years, but still keeps to his mission, to his goal, no matter what. So I thought that was an interesting mix of a comic character with a superhero from Lord of the Rings.